Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're here, because today we're taking a journey right into the very heart of global commerce. We're going to look at the world a little differently, not as a collection of separate continents, but as a massive, pulsing network of trade arteries. And, just like any complex system out there, this global network has some incredibly fragile points.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If you had to point to the single most economically vital, densely packed, and valuable stretch of water on the entire planet, where exactly would it be? Well, the financial stakes of the answer are absolutely staggering.
Okay, let's dive into this. If we trace the routes from the Americas across to the Middle East and all the way over to Southeast Asia, we find 6 fundamental maritime commerce choke points. Every single day, a literally mind-bending amount of the world's wealth flows directly through these specific, very narrow geographic coordinates.
Now, before we look at the specific data and the massive numbers coming up, let's make sure we're completely aligned on what a maritime choke point actually is. Simply put, it's a narrow, strategic waterway connecting 2 larger bodies of water. Because of how the geography works out, ships literally have no other choice but to pass through them. They act as critical bottlenecks, creating this baseline structural fragility in how the entire world trades.
Section 1. The $500 million gates.
So, starting right on the border between the Middle East and Africa, we find our first vital artery, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. This is the ultimate gateway connecting the Red Sea down to the Gulf of Aden. Through this single, narrow stretch of water, $0.5 billion worth of global commerce flows every single day. Think about that for a second. $500 million a day! And the crazy thing is, in the context of our explainer today, that massive figure is merely our lowest baseline. I mean, that just shows you how incredibly massive these trade arteries truly are.
All right, let's sweep all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. Over in the Americas is a waterway you've almost certainly heard of, the artificial marvel we know as the Panama Canal.
Notice the distinct step up in value here. The Panama Canal processes $0.7 billion. That's $700 million in daily trade value. Slicing right through Central America, it acts as this phenomenal daily shortcut for hundreds of millions of dollars in goods that otherwise would have to travel all the way around the entire South American continent. Zooming back across the Atlantic, right at the gateway of the Mediterranean Sea, we find the Strait of Gibraltar, that famous narrow opening separating Europe from Africa. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that the natural Strait of Gibraltar actually edges out the massive engineering feat of the Panama Canal in terms of daily value. We're looking at $0.8 billion of trade passing through here every single day, steadily climbing right up toward that billion-dollar threshold.
Section 2. The multi-billion-dollar straits.
Nestled right between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman is the Strait of Hormuz. And folks, we have officially crossed the threshold from the millions into the billions. $1.4 billion per day. The Strait of Hormuz is carrying almost double the daily financial weight of the Panama Canal. It's just a staggering concentration of value jumping through this specific region, funneling immense global wealth through a remarkably tight geographic space.
Just a bit to the west sits the iconic Egyptian waterway, the Suez Canal. Connecting the Mediterranean Sea down to the Red Sea, this is arguably one of the most famous artificial waterways in human history. And the daily value definitely reflects that fame. $3 billion every single day. The energy and scale of global trade just spikes massively right here. The Suez Canal processes more than double the daily value of the Strait of Hormuz. It is an absolute powerhouse of maritime commerce, acting as a completely critical linchpin in the global economy.
And this brilliantly illustrates the extreme variance in scale we're dealing with. On one end, you've got our baseline, the Bab el-Mandeb, sitting at $500 million. Next, the Suez Canal at a mighty $3 billion. But the staggering jump that's coming next shows that our scale is about to be completely broken.
Section 3. The ultimate bottleneck.
Over in Southeast Asia, flowing right between the Malay Peninsula and the Indonesian island of Sumatra, we arrive at the undisputed king of global choke points, the Strait of Malacca. $7 billion a day. Seriously, just let that sink in for a moment. $7 billion of trade flows through this single stretch of water every 24 hours. If you recall where we started with the Bab el-Mandeb at $500 million, well, the Strait of Malacca carries 14 times that value.
It is a literal river of unimaginable daily wealth, eclipsing every single other choke point on Earth by a massive, massive margin.
So the truly crucial point here is how heavily weighted global trade is toward Malacca. When you isolate just the top $3 billion choke points, you can see that Malacca alone accounts for more daily value than the Suez Canal and the Strait of Hormuz combined. The world's economic gravity heavily, and I mean heavily, pulls right through Southeast Asia.
Section 4. Why this matters. All this data paints a picture of really intense concentration. These aren't just empty dollar figures on a spreadsheet. These are fragile arteries carrying the fuel that powers our cities, the food that stocks our grocery shelves, and the electronics we rely on every day. Global commerce is incredibly streamlined for sure, but that extreme efficiency creates a massive, massive economic risk of disruption.
Which leaves us with a pretty critical thought to ponder. We know how fragile these structural bottlenecks are, right? We've seen the Suez Canal, a $3 billion a day artery, face major disruptions in the real world. So I'll leave you with this. What on earth happens to the global economy when a $7 billion gate, like the Strait of Malacca, gets closed? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today, and keep exploring.